My final reducing advice can be summed up in 2 words. Think small. Don't rummage around in your past, or your family's past, to find episodes that you think are important enough to be worthy of including in your memoir. Look for small, self-contained incidents that are still vivid in your memory. If you still remember them, it's because they contain a universal truth that your readers will recognize from their own life. That turned out to be the main lesson I learned by writing a book in 2004 called Writing About Your Life. It's a memoir of my own life, but it's also a teaching book. Along the way, I explain the reducing and organizing decisions I made. I never felt that my memoir had to include all the important things that ever happened to me, a common temptation when old people sit down to summarize their life journey. On the contrary, many of the chapters in my book are about small episodes that were not objectively important, but that were important to me. Because they were important to me, they also struck an emotional chord with readers, touching a universal truth that was important to them. One chapter is about serving in the Army in World War II. Like most men of my generation, I recall that war is the pivotal experience of my life. But in my memoir, I don't write anything about the war itself. I just tell one story about one trip I took across North Africa after our troop ship landed at Casablanca. My fellow GIs and I were put on a train consisting of decrepit wooden boxcars called 40 and 8s, so named because they were first used by the French in World War I to transport 40 men or 8 horses. The words quarantine hommes ou 8 chevaux were still stenciled on them. For 6 days, I sat in the open door of that boxcar with my feet hanging over Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. It was the most uncomfortable ride I ever took, and the best. I couldn't believe I was in North Africa. I was the sheltered son of northwestern wasps. Nobody in my upbringing or my education had ever mentioned the Arabs. Now, suddenly, I was in a landscape where everything was new. Every sight and sound and smell. The 8 months I spent in that exotic land were the start of a romance that has never cooled. They would make me a lifelong traveler to Africa and Asia and other remote cultures and would forever change how I thought about the world. Remember, your biggest stories will often have less to do with their subject than with their significance. Not what you did in a certain situation, but how that situation affected you and shaped the person you became. As for how to actually organize your memoir, my final advice is, again, think small. Tackle your life in easily manageable chunks. Don't visualize the finished product, the grand edifice you vowed to construct. That will only make you anxious. Here's what I suggest. Go to your desk on Monday morning and write about some event that's still vivid in your memory. What you write doesn't have to be long, 3 pages, 5 pages, but it should have a beginning and an end. Put that episode in a folder and get on with your life. On Tuesday morning, do the same thing. Tuesday's episode doesn't have to be related to Monday's episode. Take whatever memory comes calling. Your subconscious mind, having been put to work, will start delivering your past. Keep this up for 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. Don't be impatient to start writing your memoir, the one you had in mind before you began. Then, one day, take all your entries out of their folder and spread them on the floor. The floor is often a writer's best friend. Read them through and see what they tell you and what patterns emerge. They will tell you what your memoir is about and what it's not about. They will tell you what's primary and what's secondary, what's interesting and what's not, what's emotional, what's important, what's funny, what's unusual, what's worth pursuing and expanding. You'll begin to glimpse your story's narrative shape and the road you want to take. Then, all you have to do is put the pieces together. In that first paragraph that we read today, William Zinsser makes a point to tell us his final piece of advice, which was to think small. So if you haven't already, that's something that you're definitely going to want to highlight on your page. It's also pretty important for you to take the time to look at how he tells you to think small. What other advice does he give and how does he give it? As the text continues, he tells us a story about his own life and a memoir that he wrote. And what he tells us is that it doesn't have to be something that's important, or at least not as important as it might seem to others. What it should be is something that is still vivid in your memory and strikes an emotional chord with readers because it was important to him, or in this case, to you when you write your own. He goes on to describe a story from an instance of his life during World War II where he travels. And while it doesn't actually talk about anything that occurs during the war, what other people might find important, he writes about what he found important, which was the journey that he took and how it meant a lot to him and changed part of him in a way that made him want to travel more. He says, "This situation affected you and shaped the person you have become." So it's not what you did in a certain situation, but it's how it affected you, how it shapes you, and the life lesson that you learned from it. So he goes on and he tells you the same thing again. The advice was to think small. So we see some repetition here. He's repeated it twice now. Then he continues to give some more advice, telling you how you should organize it. Write a little bit here, a little bit there. Eventually take it out, put it all together, and see what your story might really look like. And in the end, he tells you, once you've written a little bit here and there, all you have left to do is put the pieces of the story together. Remember, I might be highlighting with the underlining with the yellow, but you guys should be highlighting these points in your unit readers.